I'm going to present to you one of the projects that I've been working on as a sort of look at how algorithms do digitally mediate our culture. Because we're really interested in the sort of fringe of things and where things change and shift in the dark. Because that's often what happens when they come to the surface, that you can find out something really interesting about them. And this is how we, as an organisation, have learnt to look at digital platforms better, or what the future of digital platforms is going to be, and what we need to be looking out for next, really. So over the last sort of few years or so, we've become a lot more aware of the role that algorithms are playing in our understanding, absorption, and filtering of culture, really, as organisations. I mean, we don't often know what algorithms really are. As the joke goes, algorithms are it's the word that for something an engineer can't be bothered to explain to you. It's a black box, one that you can't really see the process of what's going on inside, but you can see what goes in and what comes out, and that's what we're interested in lots of ways. In the last few years, as I said, algorithms have had a massive impact on the way we experience culture online, from Spotify suggestions to Amazon recommendations and social media timelines and the things you see on Twitter trends. Algorithms mediate the way we interact with the world around us. And as Christopher Steiner says, we're not always shaping the algorithms, they are shaping us. They shape our culture, they shape the way we see, they shape the way we hear, and they shape the way that we live. Now, the culture we experience is mediated by the cumulative and the collective. Often what we see is what we get. Sorry for the pun there, I realised that after I've written this talk. They shape us by allowing us to see ourselves not as we actually are, but how the algorithm sees us. Now, which then in turn influences and contributes towards our culture, because the algorithm is now actually part of our culture, and we have to kind of deal with that in some respect. So if algorithms are the invisible architecture that underpins almost everything that is happening, as Kevin Saban said in his TED talk on algorithms, what does this mean for curators and arts institutions in the age of the algorithm? If it's always listening and responding, what does that mean to us as a supposed filter of culture? Now, this is from the 9/11 Museum in Manhattan. The curator, Alice Greenwald, was so overwhelmed by the task of actually dealing with this incredibly sensitive material that she elected to have an algorithm actually curate the exhibition, scraping news stories and contents across the globe to create a multimedia exhibit of various works. In a kind of interview with NPR's Artie Shannon, Alice Greenwald said that she couldn't entrust a single living person to hand-select a few moments and stitch them together for a story. An algorithm, on the other hand, to her, finds correlation. Now, the algorithm is logical and objective and clean, and only deals with truths. This is the assumption we make of the algorithm because it's true, because that's how algorithms are designed to work. That's how we put them to work. Having to deal with difficult subject matter shouldn't mean that we have to find the most logical way of dealing with it. We are human after all, and although this shows a collective of what's happening, it actually loses a lot of the emotional weight because of its objectivity. Algorithms are not created without a point of view. They carry the perspectives and motivations of their authors. Now, in this case, it's the motivation of the curator. That data set was fed in to create this exhibition, was dictated and curated by a human with their faulty methodology and bias. That the articles and reactions thrown up were entirely in English, for instance, will tell you that this came from a very narrow kind of perspective. Now, this is not an objective record of events. This is a record of a specific experience by a specific group of people. Stepping away from responsibility and using an algorithm removes your accountability and stops any blame from finding you. Therefore, when any breaks happen, which they do often, they're not your fault and they can't be your fault. They're, in this instance, the fault of the algorithm, and if you're being particularly devious, it's the engineer. Now, one of the issues that artists and institutions always wrestle with is kind of a weird kind of theoretical problem, generally with curation, is the tyranny of the curator. This omnipotent, omniscient ruler of all the cultural dictator, as kind of people have called it in some angrier sense. Now, of course, I'm being entirely hyperbolic here. Like, this is a much more complicated discussion, but it's a conversation that's run through for centuries and is still really important to consider as we bring the digital into this. So how are artists using platforms, or can they use platforms to circumvent that problem? Introducing Cameron McLeod's Curatron, which I found probably about a week ago and still find quite hilarious and strange. It's actually an equation that uses artist input to calculate what he calls the most cohesive group show possible. So artists that are deemed eligible submit their work to the online platform, and then they have to vote on 3 other artists they're interested in meeting to collaborate, then the algorithm weighs both self and group cohesive values to determine the best combination of works. However, as we know, people are bad filters. We cheat and we lie and we like our friends. That's generally what happens. So one of the greatest flaws in the system is the fact that humans are involved with it, so therefore it can't be logical anymore. Now, what McLeod found was a lot of friends got together and actually hacked and played with their results and their choices, so they could end up being in a group show with their friends, which completely defies the point of it in the first place. And it's a really misguided attempt to apply sort of democracy to the arts at a curatorial level. And we don't really understand what this system works, but we know how to break it, essentially. Nick Layard mentions that this was in response to Jonason's fear of missing out, or FOMO, which is an exhibition of algorithmically generated works, by analysing and categorising a wide range of artworks by the artist, the auction price, the collector, what it sold for, all sorts of things, and a set of instructions were actually generated by this algorithm, and he just put the works together per instruction. And this is apparently the best way to make the most successful work of art. But he uses an algorithm here as a medium to explore a concept, but not as an ideology itself, or even as curation, in fact. It highlights that logic of the algorithm, the fact that it's clean and it's a very compromise-free way of handling the art world. And it looks at the issues of authenticity and authorship in the digital. But although Lund has no control over this curation, it's not democratic, because he implicitly understands the role that he has as the artist. He still feels authorship of the work because of the control that he has of the input, just not of the output, which is kind of the point. Algorithms aren't going to go away. I mean, we've reached a point now, I think, where we can safely say that they're going to be around for a long time. But neither as they should be. I mean, as a solution for artistic or curatorial democracy, Curathon is really short-sighted, massively short-sighted. Curation is based on forging unique and meaningful connections between the culture we produce, even if that culture isn't necessarily produced by us physically. Now, this isn't an argument against the machine at all, but rather for a better understanding of it. What an algorithm tells us is who is looking at the work, why and where we can actually listen back. I mean, essentially, this is a conversation about contextualization and discovery, about our audiences and anything else. As art organizations need to learn to exist within different overlapping ecosystems, which is Tumblr, Twitter, lots of things which are algorithmically mediated, to find out how to receive ideas and content from these places and not just to broadcast from them. I mean, we have to accept, as Danny Birchall says, that we, as museums and institutions, need to know as much about algorithms as we do about art history, because they are essentially going to be influencing us in the future. Now, I speak of this now really because our understanding of algorithms is only just becoming a conversation in itself. We've seen all the slightly comedic and weird breaks that have become visible because of the misuse of algorithms. But I don't see, of course, a rash of massively algorithmically generated exhibitions. But the fact that this is coming to the surface does tell us something about the way that we as curators and art organisations need to be engaging with these computational structures that we're using. Now, the algorithms are listening, so we really need to start listening back.